Thanks for joining me for another episode of Scotpop. In this week's episode, I'm joined by someone who, if you're a fan of Mogwai, but not too sure of Coldplay, then his musical taste may just align with yours. Born in Irvine, John Niven's probably best known for Kill Your Friends and Oh Brother, as well as writing the recent Battle, the stage play about Oasis v Blur. He's also been in a band, as well as being an A&R man, but as always on Scotpop, we start with the simple questions.
The first Scottish band I saw live. Well, would one of my mates' bands count?
That's fine. As long as it depends on the impact it had on you. It's the kind of impact we're looking for. If it's your mate's band, great, and if one comes to you in a few minutes, that's all fine as well.
Well, the first time I had a band playing live, I would be about 14, and I'd just get interested in playing the electric guitar, thinking that I wanted to do that. And there was Ravens Park Primary School. They would have lived in a room that bands used to rehearse in.
Right.
I can still remember clear as day. There was this kind of metal band, hard, heavy rock band rehearsing in there. Not the kind of music that I was into. I was kind of into. We were all into the third wave of British punk rock at that point. All these terrible bands like The Exploited and Discharge and Antipasti and all that. But anyway, we were sort of sneaked up at the window to this band record rehearsing. And I remember just thinking they sounded amazing, even though I didn't like that kind of music. Just the noise they were making was amazing. I still remember the guitar player had a Sunburst, Cherry Sunburst Les Paul and a Marshall Stack, and it just sounded, the noise of the drum kit and the guitar just sounded amazing to me. I remember thinking, God, I'd love to do that. I can't even remember the name of the band. And as I say, it wasn't even a gig. It was just like in a school hall.
Right, and you're from Irvine, isn't it? Irvine, Ayrshire. So was that a kind of musical place then? Did bands come along? Do you remember any kind of big bands coming along?
It really did. By the time we were all kind of 15, 16, we all had, I was in a punk band called Suspect Device that then became Rebel Dance. My mates Keith and Alan and Graham and all them were in a band that was called Ground Zero. That later became Dead Souls.
Right.
Because all these things started off quite, super punk rock and then evolved to become a bit more indie as the 80s went on.
Mm-hmm.
By the sort of 83, 84, we're all kind of 17, 18, but we were playing, we couldn't, remember we tried to get gigs, but we couldn't because we were too young to be in pubs, and pubs were like the only place you could play then when we were like 15, 16. So we went, the first gig we did was in my dad's garage.
Wow.
My parents, when I was 15 and a half, getting on for 16, and crazily my mum and dad went away for the weekend and left us with me in charge, me and my wee brother. And of course I said to the guys in our band and Graham and Alan's band, right, the two of us are going to do a gig in the garage on Saturday night. And we must have had maybe 40 kids from the school. I mean, I've been back to that garage since. I mean, you were lucky to get 10 adults in it, but I guess 14, 15-year-olds are a bit less. But so we did this gig, and I don't know how I thought I'd get away with it. My gran lived next door, and she wound up coming out about 11 o'clock at night and driving all these punk rockers out the garden with a broom. The neighbours all said it was the worst thing they'd heard since the war. And I shopped up to my parents a second to get back, and I was in an absolute doghouse for a while. But it was just so desperate. We built the stage out of milk crates, and we built our own lights and backdrops and stuff. And then a couple of years later, we were playing in pubs. The Grange Hotel in Irvine and Colwyn Road. We used to book the function room there.
Right.
And it got to a point where I guess, the gigs there, we'd have a couple of hundred people coming to them, and it was like tremendous. It was great fun. I still remember it very fondly, very affectionately. But it was a really thriving music scene in Irvine at that time. There were loads of bands, and there was fanzines, and there was some guys did the Newtown New Sounds compilation, like a cassette compilation of the local groups. And they came out of that scene, I guess the most successful band that emerged from that milieu were the Trash Can Sinatras.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Who were kind of on the fringes of that sort of scene. None of them were in a band together at that point. Right. I think that came a wee bit later, more like 86, 87, by which time I was in Glasgow at uni.
And was playing in bands something that you were really interested in then, or was it just something to do, or were you quite serious about it at the time?
I absolutely, up until about the age of 21, 22, thought I was going to be a rock star. I thought that was what was going to happen. But as we know, many are called, few are chosen. Um, so yeah, I moved to Glasgow. This would be like mid 80s now, 85, 86, and this was the time of the Splash One happenings and everything, the kind of
All
whole order,
right.
Primal Screaming, the Soup Dragons, and the BMX Bandits, and that kind of milieu. And I wound up getting asked to join the Wishing Stones, which was Bill Prince, who'd been the bass player in the Loft.
Of course, yeah.
And who were like, in our world, were a huge band at that time. You know, they were like megastars to us.
And how did you meet him then? How did you meet Bill Prince?
Because, God, you know what? Can't even remember the exact etymology, but whatever happened, we organised a gig for them in Glasgow, and our band
Right,
supported them. And we got on, Bill and I just got on really well. And I think he quite liked the band, but he liked my guitar playing. And then they had a tour coming up, and I suppose we're now in the sort of spring of 1987. And
right,
the guitar player left, and I got a call. I've told the story in my book, Old Brother, actually, because this was the days we didn't have a phone in the flat.
right.
But Bill knew we all drank in the Griffin, so it was like Friday night. We were all in the Griffin. The barman came out and said, "There's a phone call for there's a John Niven in here," and that Bill had sort of chanced ringing the Griffin a Friday night. And I can remember taking the phone call at the bar, and I said, "I'm glad I got you. Like, guitar players left. We've got this tour with the wedding present starting in a couple of weeks.
Right.
You want to do it? We'll send train tickets." And I thought, for me, this was like getting asked to join the Rolling Stones. I just thought I'd made it. So I get the train to London 2 days later, whatever, and learned the songs and I turned 21 on that tour.
Right.
It was just great, you know. Seemed like the big time to me.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you had, for the people that are listening that may not know the Wishing Stones, if you met an alien and you had to describe how the Wishing Stones sounded, what would you say?
our sonic blueprint was to try and cross Creedence Clearwater Revival with television.
Oh well, I think
That's a
that's
statement. So it was like it was probably a bit more jangly than we'd like to have thought. But we made two really good singles and then made an album, and it was like from 87 through to 89. But I
yeah,
remember we got to I'd dropped out of Glasgow Uni. I did the first 2 years of my English degree, and then I took 2 years out to do the band. And I remember towards the end of it, the gigs weren't getting any bigger, and it felt like we were just kind of doing the same circuit, and we were absolutely broke. I remember being at a London Marathon in April of '89, and between four of us, we didn't have
right,
enough money to buy an ice cream
right,
cone.
yeah,
I remember thinking, this is quite a hard way of life. And I
yeah,
wound up deciding, well, I think I'll go back and finish my degree. London's quite a hard place to live when you've no money, it's quite
mm,
a
mm,
tough gig, that.
yeah.
So yeah, I moved back to Glasgow in the late summer of '89 to finish my degree.
And then because the album was called Wildwood, am I right? Was it
Hmm.
Wildwood? And who
Hmm.
released that then? And what was the kid? Did it have any impact at all?
Well, the label we were on was called Subaco, which is run by a guy called Jeff Barrett, who then set up Heavenly Records.
Of
Subaco
course.
kind of became Heavenly, basically.
Hmm.
And that was around 1990. And then Jeff eventually, because he'd paid for it, and recorded the album at Greenhouse with Pat Collier, and who had done the Wonder stuff, The House of Love, Primal Screamo, did their albums at Greenhouse. It was a really top end facility back then in Shoreditch, before Shoreditch was what it is now.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, Jeff put the record out in '91, but by that point the band was no more. It was
Right.
sort of posthumous release.
Even at that point, then, were you still convinced that you could become a rock star? Then was it still the dream, or was it,
No, I
or was
kind
it
of,
slowly fading?
I'd kind of also, the other thing I'd always wanted to be was a writer, so that was
Mm,
also in the mix. And I'd made it, well, after the band sort of fell apart in '89. I made an attempt. That was my first attempt at writing a novel, which
right.
obviously, like so many first novels. I was only 23. I just didn't have the discipline to do it.
Hmm.
In terms of technique, I think I could probably have turned you a not dissimilar sentence back then to what eventually made it work for me.
Hmm.
But I just didn't have the self-discipline,
Right.
to work as hard as you need to do to write a novel. And I hadn't yet learned that writing is rewriting, that you have to go back to page one and start the next draft. And just
Yeah.
so yeah, I kind of in my mid 20s, I was thinking, that's what I'd like to do.
Right.
Become a writer. But then, of course, the music industry sort of came calling.
Yeah. Yeah. That it came calling quite hard, if I remember right. How did How did you how did you actually get involved in the music industry then? What was the
Well,
there's
just
obviously
to,
Jeff Barrett. There's obviously
well,
a
I knew some
figure.
people. I was a wee bit connected, maybe, but in a very minor way. But I graduated in '91, and I got a first. So when you get a first, you kind of do the milk round, and you can meet all stuff like merchant banks who kind of will interview anybody who's got a first. And I was quite greedy. I was maybe by this point I was like 24, 25 even. And I'd been a student, and then I'd been in the band, and as a student again. I just had never had any money. I quite greedy. I was quite keen to earn some money. But all these sort of merchant banking jobs, you had to be at your desk. Sorry, can I swear on this podcast?
No, it's okay. I'll let it out. Don't worry.
Oh, okay. You had to be at your desk for like 6:30 in the morning, and this was just unthinkable to me at that time. Which, funnily enough, I love being at my desk at 6:30 in the morning.
Right.
Yeah. But back then, I couldn't contemplate this. So I was thinking, how can I earn money and not get up at 6 o'clock in the morning? And my cousin Kevin, this was sort of 1991 at this point, and it's during the sort of dance music boom that sort of swept the country, and so many people were becoming DJs or opening nightclubs or graphic designers, or they were launching record labels, and you could put a 12-inch dance single out there and sell 5 or 6 thousand copies.
Right.
My cousin had Bomber Records, which was a very successful dance shop in West George Street in Glasgow. He also had a branch in A and a branch in Inverness.
All right.
And he went for a drink, and he said, "Look, I'm thinking of setting up a record label. Do you know how all that kind of stuff works? 'Cause you've been in an indie band, you've put records out." And I kind of lied, went, "Oh yeah, I know how that works." And I had the vaguest idea. And so I came in and helped Kevin set up the record label. And then we did a wee run there from kind of 92 to sort of 94, 95 when I was there of really making a good go of it. We
Mhm.
released a bunch of 12 inches, and a lot of them sold very well. And I became a sort of, I guess, general functionary, like marketing manager is maybe what you call it. I did press, and I did, it was only me and Kevin, so I kind of did everything. Yeah, we both did everything. I was getting paid an absolute pittance, but we started going to like music conventions, like in the city in Manchester in '93 when we went to Medem in Cannes.
Mhm.
Um, we started doing these sorts of things,
And
and
was that hard work then, John, or was it good fun, or
on
was there a lot of
it was
learning as well?
the time I was at Bomber Records, and then the first year or two at London Records were like the funnest time I ever had in a workplace. I just remember crying, laughing all the time. We just did such a riot. And at one of these conventions, we met the guys from London Records, Christian Tattersfield and John Kelly and a few others, and we got on really well. And then I'm talking about 1993 into '94 here now. We'd bump into each other, seemed to be every few months. And then finally, it was Christian Tattersfield said to me, "Like, you're wasted up there. You should come to London. You should come work for London Records." So I kind of interviewed for it, but I think it was Christian. Christian had huge success at that point. Was internal who'd done like Capella and Wigfield and a lot of huge big pop dance hits. So he had enough clout to get me hired as his own marketing person, effectively. Now suddenly I went. This would be '94ish. I moved to London at the beginning of what was sort of Britpop, and it walked into a sort of very highly paid, to me at the time, very highly paid job at a major label, and expense account, and a company car, and all this stuff.
It sounds a bit like Stephen Selfox.
It was suddenly, well,
Before we come to that, obviously, I just watched the film again at the weekend just to remind myself just how annoying but how funny he actually is, because that's the thing. But we won't jump too far ahead. So London Records, was that a good time then? Obviously at that point was it the start
it,
of Britpop, and that, what kind of bands were you working with?
well, we men's were on the label at the time, with Marion on the label, Goldie, I was his marketing manager, Orbital. So there was some good acts, some good acts. There was also a lot of pop stuff with at least 17, and with London Historic, with had Bananarama, Fine Young Cannibals, Jimmy Somerville, that kind of thing.
Right.
So a very successful pop label, very good at getting hits, and I was initially a marketing guy. And then I sort of accidentally moved into. I always you sense quite quickly that the sort of real power and influence at a label is the A&R department. So that's, if you get any ambition, I think that's where you want to be. And so I wound up accidentally signing this Mike Flowers Pops version of Wonderwall, which
Oh, I
was very,
remember that. All
was
right.
very
Yeah.
nearly the Christmas number one.
Yeah.
And 1995 went in at number two. Excuse me, Michael Jackson just kept us off number one.
How did you
But
come across him then?
it
How
was a
did?
really bizarre, it was a strange week.
Because
I'm
that was the guy
talking,
with the white wig, wasn't he?
yes,
Yeah, I remember them.
but you can still find the video on YouTube. But it
Yeah.
was November of '95, and as I did back then, when I look at my diaries from there, I was out like 5 nights a week, and like out, in a way that would kill me now. And I'd been at a party for the promoter Harvey Goldsmith, and Mike Flowers was in musical entertainment.
All
Um,
right.
and his orchestra played the party, and it was all covers. It was Age of Aquarius, and he didn't do Wonderwall, just all easy listening sort of songs. And I went into the office the next day and bumped into a guy called Nick Raphael, who then ran Capitol Records for years, very successful exec. And Nick said, "You see any gigs last night?" I said, "Yes, I was band Mike Flowers Pops." And he went, "Any hits?" And I went, "Well, it's all covers." And he's like, "Oh, forget that." And then like 2 days later, maybe even the next day, I was living in Notting Hill at the time. I woke up in bed, and as it was my habit, you turn on the radio, it was Chris Evans' breakfast show. And he's playing this version of Wonderwall, this easy listening version. And it finishes, and he goes, "That's the Mike Flowers Pops, and we're going to be playing that every day. I love it." And I'm like, "Holy shit, that's the guy I saw last night." And
Uh,
so I rang my friend Liam, who worked for Harvey Goldsmith, who'd organised the party, and I went, "You have to get me on the phone with this guy, Mike Flowers, now." And I've got his number, and he lived in Battersea, and I just drove straight over there from Notting Hill to see him. And we had lunch, and I think it was the first label through the door, because by within 48 hours there was a load, go discs were trying to sign him. There was lots of labels, and
is it as feral as that?
oh yeah.
Is it really? Once everybody starts?
Well,
Remember?
at that point, Chris Evans' show had something like 18 million listeners. So if Chris Evans playing your record every day for a week, you're going to have a hit to some
Right.
degree. And also the Oasis phenomenon. Oasis had just played Earl's Court in
Right.
2 nights, and they were just coming into their peak Imperial phase.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at the time, it was just good. So Mike signed with us, and yeah, we sold 500,000 singles. So that was kind of success enough for me suddenly to be an A&R guy.
And is that all it takes then for to get the one person through the door and get them signed? Does that give you the kind of keys to the door then? Is
It,
that
it was enough back then, yeah.
yeah.
And then I got offered a job to go to Andy McDonald, who'd had Go Discs, had sold that company, and was setting up a new label called Independiente through
Right.
Sony. And I'd met Andy a few times, and he said, "Do you want to come over here and do publishing, A&R?" So that's where I went next. And
And
yeah, I was, I mean, I should make it clear I was a really bad A&R guy. I was very lazy and kind of, close in terms of hearing hits. But it was,
would you have signed the Wishing Stones?
uh, I shouldn't have, but I probably would. But I mean, that was the first, I guess, from '94 through to about '98 was all kind of good fun,
Right.
and then it got a bit. I was sort of turning 30 around that time, and I still had this thing ticking away that I thought I wanted to be a writer, and I was starting to think there might be a good novel to be had about my
Right.
time at London Records, because it was such a cutthroat, vicious environment.
Hmm.
Um, and I was I wound up thinking I could try and cling on to a job in the music business and write the novel in my spare time and see how if that takes a few years. And then in the end, I'd kind of burn my bridges a wee bit. I think,
Because am I right in
and
thinking you came across Muse and Coldplay, but you decided not to sign them? Is that
well,
true?
this story gets told a lot, and it's kind of. It's not like I had them in my office and went, "You're garbage." It was more just.
So what happened then?
Well, I got the demos the same time all the other guys were getting them, and look, with both of them, I just thought there was kind of the early Muse and the early Coldplay stuff. It was all quite sub Radiohead in that
Yeah.
ballpark. And
Yeah.
I liked Radiohead fine, but I thought, do we need another couple of these? And it turns out we did.
Yeah, yeah. And
But
is that a big regret then? Is it does any
financially, yeah, but
A&R people
financially,
think like that, or do they just move on to the next one?
well, financially, yes, of course, it's a big regret. The problem with my friend Dan Keeling did sign Coldplay, and
Right.
Dan, he's out of music institute. He's a restaurateur now. He's got a chain of restaurants in London called Noble Roach are very good, and I write for their magazine. I see Dan quite a lot, but so yeah, he did win the lottery there.
Yeah, yeah. And so did you come across any other bands and did you sign any other bands that we can know of at
Oh,
that
there's an
point?
American band called the Police Brothers, who I think are
Oh yeah,
brilliant. Still
yeah.
think are brilliant, and I put their records out in the UK for a bit. And because after Independiente, I had my own label, Southpaw, which was through Play It Again, Sam. And as part of that deal, I brought in Ziga Ross to the company, and we
Hmm.
did a label deal with Fat Cat to bring Ziga Ross into PS, and then I signed Mogwai.
All
Um,
right,
when their third record after the first two albums, I signed them for Rock Action,
right.
and I had a great time with those guys, and really proud of that record. I think that album still really holds up. The third Mogwai LP.
What can he capture you a bit more? I didn't realize it. What captured you a bit Mogwai then? What did you
As a
see?
live phenomenon, and especially in America at that point, like they go to San Francisco and they play, the Fillmore to like 2 or 3 thousand people
Right,
without having, they were this real, and you could see the size of the crowds growing. And we went to Japan and played Fuji Rock, and a tent of 10,000 people went bananas. And
right.
I kind of thought they were one of those bands, which happened to a small degree, like the Grateful Dead, who just have this enormous, very loyal
Mm,
following
mm,
who love everything they do.
mm.
They were impossible to A&R. They would never
Yeah,
listen to anything you said. Even I mean, we're still good friends with Stuart Braithwaite and Barry from the band. We still see each other whenever I'm up in Glasgow.
right.
And yeah, maybe we should have listened a couple of times, but you couldn't tell them anything, you know.
Yeah.
If you said do this, they'd do the opposite.
Was the commercial aspect of them, was that something that, as a label, you weren't actually that concerned about? Because they weren't actually that commercial. And remember, because I think everybody will know Mogwai, and most people listening to this will know Mogwai, but a lot of people that kind of jumping in will know them from the kind of Blur spat they had. Remember that big Blur
Yes,
spat?
that
Yeah,
was just
which obviously, we'll come to another spat in a minute as well, but Mogwai's spat, do you think they could have crossed over, or was it just, is it just, is
No,
it just,
I think they did to a bit. I mean, they got to the point where they could play Brixton Academy. They played the SE. They're playing the SEC in Glasgow to like sort of
mm,
6,000 people. They took it very far. I think for a band as sonically uncompromising as that. I
mm,
think had they done a few things different on the way, they might have been a wee bit bigger. But it's hard to say.
yeah.
And they never sort of portrayed what they do, and they still have a very loyal following now, making
Yeah,
music for 30 years now.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and they still tour the whole world to a decent degree. So
yeah,
fair play to them.
yeah, absolutely. And so taking it forward then, John, you obviously then decide maybe your kind of early 30s, like this kind of dream of being a writer, and without jumping too far forward with Kill Your Friends, how true is it? And because the book kind of is quite explicit. The film, I think Nicholas Holt's character, he's not a likable person. He's very funny, and I think someone actually, one of the critics described it as a cross between American Psycho and Spinal Tap. Is that a fair representation of what you were after, what you're trying to do with the book?
Yeah, that's probably not unfair. Yeah, the difficult thing with that. So when I started writing that novel, it took a long time. I think I started trying to write the novel in about 2002,
Right.
2003, and I didn't get it right until about 2006. It was like a good 4 years.
All
Um,
right.
well, because I was kind of teaching myself how to write a novel at this point, you know. Um,
Did you
and
have? Did you always have the idea though? Did you always want to write a book about the music industry?
yeah, I wanted to. The initial idea for the book was about a sort of decent sort of guy with good music taste and good intentions who gets sort of sucked into the industry and becomes sort of corrupted. And
Hmm.
it was written in the third person. It was just really dull and boring. And at some point along the line, I made the decision to write it from the point of view of the bad guy in the novel, like
Right.
from his perspective, and that he's in the belly of the beast and he absolutely loves it there, and he's
Hmm.
totally unapologetic about all the bad stuff. And I made a rule that the worst things I heard and saw in the industry, which is usually the way that executives talk about artists when they're not around. I thought anything like that was fair game, that I would put that in the book, you know.
Hmm.
And sure enough, when the novel came out, my friend Christian Tattersfield, who I'd worked with over the years, he rang me up and said, he goes, the funny thing is, people are going to think that you're exaggerating. And, and well, no murders that I was party to, but in terms of the attitude and the behaviour the novel represents and the mentality, that's all
Mm,
very much on the money, I think,
right.
you know.
And do you think that time in A&R's gone then? Because it's, that kind of whole idea of going out and staying out to like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and then signing a band. And is that, do you think that's
Well,
all?
I'm the wrong guy to ask 'cause I'm old. I'm in my 50s now, and I don't know. I don't know how they live, the young guys. I mean, I think I look at that generation because my son's 30 now. He's the kind of age I was when I was involved in that, and him and his friends seem much more sensible and career
Right.
focused. They don't drink and party to any sort of extent I think we did back then. I
Hmm.
wonder if some of that's a generational shift. I wonder also that there's kind of, I think what happened in the music industry is a lot of the chancers got cleaned out. Like back in my day, there was loads of guys earning like 80, 100 grand a year who were like kind of
Hmm.
general managers, market managers, senior A&R guys, consultant who just, that can all get chopped away. Now I think
Yeah.
the guys at the very top who are doing very well and who have to be good. And there's probably a lot of junior people much
Hmm.
further down the food chain. That whole sort of middle layer of chancers taking massive salaries and not
Yeah.
really
And you,
delivering.
at that point, then, when you decide, to kind of follow the dream of being a writer, then, because that would be around the internet time. Can you remember what kind of impact the internet had on kind of labels like London and Independiente? Was it quite seismic? Because obviously, looking out and from the outside looking in, I mean, when
Well,
kind of
eventually,
Napster
yeah,
and
of course it became so. I mean, when I was there, it was like in the marketing meetings, you'd have it at the very end, they'd say, "What about digital?" And somebody would go, "Oh, we'll do a website for the band." Right, fine. And that would be it. Whereas now, my wife still works in the music industry. She said like 80% of the meeting is just digital
right.
marketing. It's all about what we're doing on Instagram, TikTok, yeah, all these places, and YouTube, and the rest is just conversation. So the industry's changed beyond all recognition.
And so,
Um,
and so going forward with Stephen Stelfox, because he's the main character in the book. Is he someone, do you think, that could maybe work in the industry today, or is that again, a bit of an anathema now with
I think if he was in the industry today, he would be much higher up the food chain and probably out the other end of rehab by now and clean and sober. I'd like to think.
And how difficult was it to turn that book into a film then? Because the film with Nicholas Hoult was the main character, I remember reading somewhere there was a kind of gestation period of quite a few years up until about, I think it came out in 2015 if I remember right.
Yeah, I
Was it
think we
quite hard to turn it into a film, and was there a
well, to get any film made is almost impossible of any nature, let alone one with such an unsympathetic sort of protagonist,
hmm,
I think we sold the film rights like the year after the book came out, 2009 maybe.
hmm,
Full respect to Gregor Cameron, the producer, and Will Clark at Altitude who got it done. They really got it over the line. And it took about 4 years to get the financing in place and get it done.
right?
So yeah, it's always really tough, especially with material like that.
Mm-hmm. And so that takes us into your next big project in the music business anyway, the Battle, the kind of Blur Oasis. Why did you decide to write that stage play, and how did it come about, and what kind of drew you to the story?
Well, I'm a writer for hire, and producers will approach you all the time with projects and say, "Do you fancy doing this?" And with this one, it was a guy called Simon Friend, who's a very successful commercial theatre producer. He'd done Life of Pi and Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, things like that. And he got in touch with my agent, and we had a meeting, and he said, "Look, I think there might be an interesting stage play about the battle for number one between Blur and Oasis, and if you fancy writing it?" And I kind of thought. I wasn't sure at first. I was kind of worried that it was after sort of Britpop the musical, which isn't really the kind of thing I do. Um, and then the way I went away and thought about it, I thought, you know what, there might be a kind of funny David Mamet sort of play about men screaming at each other in hot rooms about something that when we pull the camera back is just really ridiculous. Who cares which one of these stupid pop records is number one? But I thought if we could invest it with kind of Cuban Missile Crisis stakes, that seemed to me it would work as a piece of comedy. So I pitched that idea and he said, yeah. So I went away. This is back in 2023. So I went off and spent a year or so just writing and rewriting and trying to get the play to work. And in the meantime, during that, Oasis reformed, and the sort of level of interest was just insane. So that definitely gave Simon, I think, the idea that he was on the right track commercially. And so the next thing, yeah, I wrote it, and then we got Matthew Dunster came on board as director, who's just fantastic. He did that play 222 A Ghost Story with Lily Allen, that ran for ages in the West End. He just finished doing Hunger Games in London,
Mhm.
and then he did this. So yeah, we ran for a month there in Birmingham.
And what was it
So
like an opening night for you as a writer and someone who's worked in the music industry and that person back in Irvine-Ayrshire who kind of dreams of it and then opening night to see these
Well, the
two.
theatre's very weird, you see, because like with a book or with a movie, your audience for it increases incrementally. Like a few readers will read it, or a few people will see a rough cut of the film, and then you got a bigger test screening, and then you kind of so you get used to seeing it with people, having people read it gradually. But the theatre, it's just you and the director and the cast for weeks, and we rehearse for like 6 weeks, which is unheard of in feature films. You might get a week or two if you're lucky, and so you're just in this bubble on your own. You kind of suspect that seems funny to me, but what I know. And then so the first night it opened in Birmingham, the first it was sold out like 800 seats, and I was absolutely terrified. I've never been so terrified in multiple venues. You've got no idea what you've got until you see it
Mm,
with an audience. So as
mm.
a writer, part of me sitting there thinking, I might just have written Springtime for Hitler. The audience, it might just be faces of absolute horror and disgust and confusion and what the hell is that? So you're sitting there going, and then we get a really big laugh on the second line. I remember the relief that shot through me. I thought, okay,
Really? Is it? Yeah.
and then we get huge big standing ovation, and people, the reactions in Birmingham have just been amazing.
Yeah, and so just to take, we're kind of, I know I'm just kind of conscious of the time here as well, John. I know you've got to kind of dash off, but
Hmm.
there's you wrote you obviously, I know you write for the Observer, and you wrote a lovely piece about Ben Watt. I think you've obviously seen Ben Watt perform. It's a song I think you
Yeah,
meant.
yeah, everything but the girl at
Yeah,
Moscow. Hmm.
yeah, and then you mentioned the song Winter's Eve.
Hmm.
Is watching live music, 'cause obviously you obviously saw that show. Is watching live music something you're still interested in? Because there's a few questions just to ask you at the end about your favourite bands and that. But is live music still? Does it still give you that thrill to this day?
Yeah, well, I mean, I get pulled into a lot of it via my wife and my daughter. They're much more plugged in. I'm an old man now, but they're much more plugged in than I. So this past year or so has been the year of Geese and Cameron Winter. My wife became obsessed with Cameron Winter about a year and a bit ago when his album came out, and then got into Geese via that.
Right.
And so we've been to see Geese live a couple of times in the past year. We saw Cameron at the Roundhouse. We saw Geese in a tiny little pub in East London last year.
Mm.
We're off to see them at Hammersmith Apollo next week, the week after. I go, yeah. So this is Lorelei. I love that guy. MJ Lenderman, I think, brilliant. So
Hmm.
yeah, still, I mean, I'm kind of left to my own devices. It's quite hard to get me out of the house to anywhere other than a very nice restaurant. But but I will go to gigs now and then. Always kind of enjoy it once I've made the effort.
Yeah. And if you had to pick one kind of favourite Scottish act, who would it be?
Oh God, that's almost impossible. There's so many. Got a very soft spot for Delamitri. I've
Ah,
got
right.
but there's so many Scottish bands I love. The Bourgie. We could go off map and Close Lobsters. To be honest, I mean Orange Juice were probably the kind of the alpha. The where a lot of things that I love stem from.
Mm,
I will scream I love. But a band that I've been very slow to get into for stupid, idiotic teenage reasons were the Transcan Sinatras, whose
right.
music I only really discovered in the past couple of years. I'd never really, because we're in bands, and everyone back in the day, there was probably about half like teenage rivalry. And then I think a friend of a guy I know, Craig McAllister, wrote a book called Perfect Reminder, which was a kind of very detailed account of the making of their second record, which she gave me a copy of, and then I wound up reading it when I was back home in Irvine. And it's that thing when you're reading a book that's really well written about a band that the person clearly loves, you think, well, I should listen to this. Well, I have. So it was that album, I've Seen Everything, that I started listening to it. I thought, oh God, what? It's such a fabulous record, and
Mm-hmm.
and then the one after it actually is also pretty great. Happy Pocket. So and then there's some really standout tracks and some of the later stuff. I mean, they've made so much good music and kind of fascinating story that these five guys who formed in about 1986, 7, and they're still. I mean, they're all scattered around the world. And I think a few of them in Scotland, one's in Seattle, one's in LA, but they still get together to make a record every few years.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're all still friends, which is pretty impressive.
What kind of music do you listen to when you're actually writing? Then do you listen to music or do you?
No, I can't. I can't listen to music when I'm writing. It fascinates me that some writers do, like Ian Rankin does. I know Stephen King famously does, but I can't
Right.
because it's certainly not anything with vocals. Because the minute that starts, I'm just, I can't concentrate.
And is there once you've finished writing, is there kind of an album that you turn to, a Scottish album you turn to, the one that you always
Well,
play or?
for the last couple of years on heavy rotation has been the trash cans. I've
All
seen.
right. Yeah.
I'd say that's been kind of very popular.
And just kind of final question: is there a new band that you've heard, or one that you've kind of come, or even if it's just one you've recently discovered, a Scottish act that you've kind of thought, yeah, they're a bit different, or
I'm a big fan of Butcher Boy,
all right,
Glasgow band. Who I mean, they're not that new, and they very rarely release music or do anything. But it's a band that people might not have heard of that I think are great. It's Butcher Boy.
and what's so good about them then? What's the
They
attraction?
just combine a lot of the things that there's elements Aztec Camera and Orange Juice and Bell and Sebastian. Bell and Sebastian I love. Another obvious one to mention.
Hmm.
We're off to see them at the Royal Albert Hall in a couple of weeks. Mogwai still eagerly anticipate anything those guys do.
Excellent, John. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
No, Alan, my pleasure.
That's it for episode 6 of Scotpop. Thanks to John for joining me, and especially thanks to you for listening. I'll be back soon. Cheers.